The Secrets of Middle-earth is brought to you by the StarQuest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give.
I desired dragons with a profound desire. Of course, I and my timid body did not wish to have them in the neighborhood. But the world that contained even the imagination of Fafnir was richer and more beautiful at whatever the cost of peril.
You're listening to The Secrets of Middle-earth, where we discuss the hidden themes and deeper layers found in the works of J.R.R. Tolkien, whether in his writings or in any of the media derived from them. I'm Thomas Salerno, and joining me today on the panel are Jeff Haecker. Hello there, Jeff.
Hey, Thomas.
And Patrick Mason. Hello, Pat.
Howdy, Thomas.
Be sure to follow The Secrets of Middle-earth on Apple Podcasts, YouTube Music, Spotify, or any podcast directory or app. And you can find us on social media at facebook.com/StarQuestMedia, or on X, where we are at SQPN, or on Instagram, where we are at StarQuest Network. And don't forget, you can get your own official Secrets of Middle-earth merch and gear, including our awesome t-shirt, at sqpn.com/merch. It's a great way for you to support our show and to display your love for Tolkien and his wonderful world of Middle-earth. And today, in honor of the Feast of St. George the Dragon Slayer, coming up in April, we are discussing the dragons of Middle-earth. Very, very excited.
There be dragons.
Yeah. There be dragons, right? Yeah, on the old maps and stuff, pirate things. Yeah, it's great. So, like, I guess dragons are really one of the first things that people think of when they think of fantasy and of Middle-earth. I mean, like, the first of the Middle-earth books to be published, The Hobbit, basically the main antagonist is a dragon. So, you know, I definitely thought, like, it's long overdue. We need to cover the dragons of Middle-earth. I want to ask, do you guys, and we're going to talk about the 4 named dragons in the Legendarium and some ancillary stuff, but do either of you have a favorite among the 4 named ones?
And I think Uncaligon the Black is pretty cool, because he's I believe he's bigger than Glaurung, but he can also fly, and he's killed by a flying ship. And when he crashes, or he's killed by Arundel in his flying ship, and then he crashes and destroys mountains when he dies. So I think Uncaligon the Black is a pretty cool one. And you know, I would love to see that, you know, whole big battle on screen, you know, the War of Wrath on screen, and see that big battle, which we kind of see. I don't know if it's Uncaligon the Black that we see in like the ROP like prologue, where they're kind of showing that last battle. But I think we do see a dragon at least. So I don't think it's that one's in particular in Uncaligon, probably because they would have to, like, they don't have the rights to it because it's Silmarillion. But I like to think that, you know, maybe that's what it might look like, just less grand than. But yeah, I think Uncaligon's
way smaller. Cool. Yeah.
Yeah. I was gonna say, I think Uncaligon's supposed to be, you know, 4 times the size of Glaurung. He's you know, a winged mountain, effectively, with with lightning jaws. He's really, I like Glaurung, and I like Glaurung because we get so much about him, and his story is tied in so much with Turin bars. And I like him as kind of a traditional dragon, the non-winged variety, you know, the worm dragon. So, because we kind of get, you know, dragons are quote unquote mythological creatures, but they're historio-mythological creatures because of the dinosaur bones.
Right. Yeah. As Jimmy Aiken has mentioned on Mysterious World a couple of times, you know, like, people digging up dinosaur bones in the past, you know, we've discovered dragons, essentially, you know, like, and people in the Middle Ages actually finding dinosaur bones. And yeah, it's like dragons were real. go to your natural history museum and see them. So
Yeah.
I guess for me, it's gotta be Smaug.
Smaug, yeah.
Golden. I mean, like, because like not only do we get so much of them in the Hobbit book itself, and of course the Hobbit films, but he's so much of like a classic fairy tale dragon. You know, like if Glaurung is like the classic mythological or like literally classical, like Greco-Roman, like worm type of dragon, then Smaug is the fairy tale dragon, because, you know, he's big and red, he can fly, he's got wings, he hoards gold, he can talk. You know, I mean, Glaurung can talk, but, you know, like Smaug is almost like cultured in a way.
Yes.
You know, the way he talks, he's very much a kind of Brothers Grimm dragon combined with a little bit of Norse dragon in him. But Smaug has so much of a personality. He's so vain. And I love in the animated Hobbit movie how much they make him look like a cat. You know, because that just seems to make, like, Smaug has a lot of a very cat-like personality about him, you know, and just because of how much, you know, personality and classic villaininess there is about Smaug. You know, I just love him as a character, and he makes a great villain for the Hobbit. But before we get in more to like the named dragons of the Legendarium, I guess we should talk a bit about the more about the inspirations behind these dragons that Tolkien was drawing on, because of course, like dragon stories are from all over the world, and there's countless myths and legends about dragons, and Tolkien was such an expert in this stuff that, you know, of course we have the classical dragons, the worms, right? They don't have wings, you know, like, and there's a great book put out by Penguin that's just called The Penguin Book of Dragons, where they actually devote a lot of space to the classical dragons, and they're very different from like the way dragons are seen now because of every fantasy novel and like Game of Thrones. You know, like they crawl on the ground like snakes. They have venom. They shoot poison instead of fire and stuff. And that's basically the kind of dragon you have in the St. George legend. You know, it's a waterborne monster. It has toxic breath, all that stuff.
Yeah, I was going to say, I was doing a little bit of just like quick research but today on kind of the myth of dragons, and just because they're like a lot of cultures, ancient cultures across the world had myths of dragons, and it's very interesting because, you know, they eat, even though like cultures across the world from each other had these similar myths. And one theory I read that I thought was interesting was that it was kind of in response to kind of a fear of snakes, because especially in some areas you have giant snakes and that may have, you know, attacked people or eaten people, and so maybe that was in response to. And another theory was maybe because they, you know, people saw fossils of you know, dinosaurs that they didn't know what a dinosaur was, so they assumed, you know, it's some kind of the bones of a dragon or something. So I thought that was a really interesting idea. But like you said, they were more like giant snakes and serpents than, you know, the flying dragon that we kind of associate now with most kind of dragons.
Yeah, there was an anthropological theory, and I don't think it's given much credence nowadays, but I always thought it was interesting, where it was this idea that dragons represent an amalgam of the three sort of main predators that would have been dangerous to early humans and early primates, where it's kind of an amalgam of the big cat, the bird of prey, and the reptilian predator, like a constrictor snake. You know, it's got coils and scales and venom like a snake. It's got the kind of teeth and claws of a big cat, or sometimes the facial features of a big cat, and wings like a bird of prey, or sometimes the raptorial claws of a bird of prey. So it was this idea that it's like, it's this psychological image that's imprinted in like the evolutionary memory of like the human race, or it's like here are the different parts of all the dangerous animals you have to worry about.
Yeah, that's the statement
really
of the
dragons, and they attacked humans early on, and it's now in our genetic
memories. Yeah.
I'm just waiting for a bad construction project in England to wake them up and burn the world. And
oh, I almost forgot about that movie. That's Reign of Fire, isn't it?
Yes, Reign of Fire.
Yes.
Not the best movie, but it was actually not as bad as I think you would think it was.
It was entertaining.
I thought it was fun.
Watching a reenactment of Star Wars in a post-apocalyptic world. that was fun. So, yeah, I like that theory. I think the guy that draws the short stick on most of the theories is the alligator / crocodile, and he's so obviously gotta be part of the equation because there's so many of have them crawling on the ground. And growing up in Florida, like the concept of alligators is just omnipresent, right? It's a small body of water. There's definitely an alligator in there. And by small body, I mean a puddle. So like anybody who lived in a tropic kind of area was probably very aware of there's something floating just beneath the surface that has a giant jaw with giant teeth and giant scales. And so I always like they throwing in the alligator and the crocodile into the mix because dragons are sort of in between them, right? They're very lithe like serpents, but they have the armor and the giant mouth.
And that's got to be part of it because in the St. George myth from the Golden Legend, which was like a compilation of saint stories from many centuries ago, the dragon that George fights comes out of a lake. Like a lake with lots of like reeds and stuff like that, where like a crocodile could hide or something. And it also the story takes place in North Africa, where there are lots of Nile crocodiles. So it's like there has to be some sort of inspiration there. But you not only have the story of Saint George, and there's actually more saint versus dragon stories than just him. A year or two ago, I did like a deep dive like research project to find out like how many saint stories could I find where they actually tackle dragons. And there's quite a few, including one that's connected to an early pope, Saint Sylvester the First. And in this probably hagiographical story of his, he descends into the Roman catacombs and seals up a dragon that's down there who's creating noxious fumes that's killing people.
That's a missed Sylvester Stallone action movie opportunity. If I've ever heard one.
Oh, Pope Sly.
Pope Sylvester.
Pope Sylvester. I am the law.
I am the canon law.
And the dragon is voiced by what's his name from The Rock from Rocky IV, and he says, "I will break you."
No.
Oh my gosh.
But
yeah.
But probably like the biggest influence on Tolkien's dragons has to be the Norse dragons. And I'm thinking of two in particular. One, the dragon from the final act of Beowulf, and the dragon from Sigurd and the Dragon, or Siegfried and the Dragon, which I think that story is told in a few places, but the one I read recently was from the Poetic Edda. Have either of you ever read either Beowulf or Sigurd and the Dragon?
I read Beowulf back in school, but it's been a while since I have. But yeah, I always like the end of it where it's like it's the because Beowulf's an old man after he defeated whatever monster.
Grendel?
I can't remember the name. Yes, Grendel. Yeah.
Grendel's mom.
Yeah. And he has to fight a dragon with the help of another Viking there. So I always like that little part of the story, but yeah, it's been a while since I've read it. So, and I have not really read any of the other poetic eddas or anything that would have dragons in them. So
Sigurd
Yeah,
I'm sorry,
I didn't get to any of those. The one I'm most familiar with is the one that ushers in Ragnarok. That has to do with Yggdrasil.
Oh,
So Nidhogg or
Nidhogg. Yeah. I almost put that guy on the list, and then I forgot. Yeah. He's the guy who like eats the roots of the world tree, right?
Yep.
And then, of course, there's also Jormungandr, the world serpent, who coils around it. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Jormungandr. And Nidhogg. Yeah. I just love the Norse fascination with the end of the world is going to have giant monsters. Like there's going to be a giant serpent, and there's going to be a giant dragon, and there's going to be a giant wolf, and there's going to be giant people that we're going to call giants. It's going to be fire ones and ice ones.
Yeah, and like
and dwarves probably.
And the Norse end of the world is like, everything but the kitchen sink is thrown into it pretty much.
Yep.
But yeah, like the dragon in Beowulf, like, it's very much like Glaurung. He sits on this cave in a pile of gold that he's got. And the part of the purpose is to like win the horde back from the dragon. So like, it's almost like, that's the plot of The Hobbit. They're trying to win the horde back from the dragon.
Back from Smaug.
Sigurd and the Dragon is interesting because when I read it recently, I didn't realize how influential it was on both Middle-earth and Narnia. Because the dragon in Sigurd and the Dragon is a person who was turned into a dragon because of his greed. Much like the kid in Voyage of the Dawn Treader, who, when he finds a dragon horde, becomes a dragon himself. Was that Eustace or was that one of the other?
No, it was Eustace.
That was Eustace. Yeah.
And almost very similar to Gollum. Like when Smeagol finds the ring, it transforms him into Gollum because of his greed, and so very similar there too.
But then, as we'll get into with Glaurung, the way Sigurd kills the dragon is pretty much the way Turin kills Glaurung, except in this case, instead of it's the stab from above. In this case, Sigurd goes into like a pit in the ground, and when the dragon goes over, he stabs upward, and the dragon's called Fafnir, and so he stabs upward, and that kills him. And just like Glaurung and Turin, there's a final conversation between them where the dragon is like trying to curse Sigurd. And then there's another connection to The Hobbit because like the thrush that delivers the message to Bard, there are these birds, these nuthatches in the trees who tell Sigurd to eat the dragon's heart, and then he'll gain the power over all languages and stuff like that. So there's a lot of these little, like, we've got the talking birds, we've got the final death conversation, we've got the stab upward from below, of the very crawling serpent-like dragon. There's a lot of connections, mostly with Glaurung, but somewhat Smaug in Sigurd and the Dragon. And there's also a magic ring, but it's just mentioned in passing. And I'm like, wait, what?
Tolkien's like, I'll write a book about that.
But I think in this case, it's a ring that like it makes more of itself. That's power. It doesn't turn you invisible. It like multiplies itself somehow. But yeah, so it's like clearly, and we know that Tolkien loved the Norse sagas and the Norse myths and legends. So clearly he's taking a lot of inspiration from those when he's crafting his own dragons. But yeah, so now we can get into the count them four named dragons in the Legendarium. You'd think there'd be more, but there actually aren't. Like the dragons show up kind of occasionally in the background sometimes, but of the ones who have names and personalities, we really only know of 4, and 2 of them are from the Silmarillion. And spoiler warning ahead that there is going to be some, if you're following along with our Silmarillion stuff and you haven't read either, the last battle or the stuff with Turin, there's going to be spoilers for that.
Yeah.
But
We already
first,
spoiled it, but
yeah, we already spoiled it anyway. But I mean, we're going to go into deeper, like more detailed spoilers though. But yeah, so let's start with Glaurung. We've already seen him in our Silmarillion read through because he's created by Morgoth. I would probably say like pretty soon after the elves arrive, the Noldor anyway, arrive back in Middle Earth. Like he's probably just like, okay, I need a super weapon
Yeah.
to destroy these elves.
I get a feeling that like, so he likely took a lot of the creeping darkness creatures into Autumno. And when Autumno's overthrown, he's taken back in chains. But as I've said, every time we bring Autumno up, the Valar didn't do their job and get rid of everything else. And so I have this feeling that Glaurung was probably started prior to Melkor's enchainment. I have a feeling that Sauron grabbed him and along with some other stuff and went to Angband. And, I have that theory in the back of my head, like they tunneled basically to Angband and then set up shop there. And, as crafty as Sauron is, he probably couldn't take Glaurung much further, as far as like a creature would go beyond what it already was. Whereas when Morgoth gets back, between Glaurung, the father of dragons, and then by the time of the War of Wrath, he's got Encalagon the Black, which is a very different creature by the time he gets a hold of it, but still a dragon. So I kind of have this thought process that's sort of it's maybe what Sauron was working on while Dad was in the clink locked up.
yeah. Well, so I wonder, I'm kind of thinking, and I don't know if this is confirmed in any other material, but similar to how the elves were twisted by Morgoth into into becoming the orcs and other things, I wonder if Glaurung's whatever, because there might have been a proto dragon of some sort. I wonder if because we see in Rings of Power, we have that giant, sea creature that attacks Sauron's ship early on, or in Galadriel, like in the pretty early on in the show. And so I'm wondering if it's something like that he captured, one of these giant ancient creatures and, just twisted it like he did elves to become the orcs. And the result of that was Glaurung. And then, like you said, I think it's probably a good bet that, like you said, Pat, that Sauron took that a step further and, because maybe he's like, well, Manwë has eagles and they have these giant eagles. Like, we need something that can fly. And so they probably took in, because Morgoth and all these and his followers, they're not, like we've talked about, they're sub-creating. They're not really creating. They're just sub-creating, and they can't make something of their own. They are basically can only twist and imitate what has already been made by someone else, by Eru Ilúvatar. So I'm guessing that the flying part was probably inspired by the eagles, but also because when Glaurung gets killed, it's like, well, maybe if Glaurung could fly, then maybe he wouldn't have
gotten killed. Yeah.
So
especially how Glaurung goes down.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like I think that Tolkien, like the orcs, he keeps the creation of the dragons intentionally vague. Although even more vague than the orcs, because at least in the Silmarillion, he does put forth the theory that, they're corrupted elves. Where it's like, I'm pretty sure the dragons are corrupted something. Like they had to have been based on a pre-existing creature, whether like a natural creature, like some sort of reptile, or some other thing, maybe, one of the nameless things or something.
Yeah. Or maybe like werewolves, like Sauron's whole thing was putting the evil Maiar spirits into a wolf. Maybe it's something like that, where Morgoth took, some kind of ancient, like I said, reptile or something, and then forced and put a Maiar spirit into it. And so that's where kind of the first dragons were we're basically a Maiar, werewolf, were-dragon type of
Were-dragons. Yeah, I mean, like, yeah. So see, so they're possessed dinosaurs. They took dinosaurs and shoved a Maiar spirit into them, some ancient reptile, and now they can talk. So they're like,
yeah. Well, and that's sort of like, so a Glaurung is very basilisk-like in his presentation, right? He's got the scales all over him. His eyes mesmerize you and freeze you in place, right? They don't turn you to stone, but they do stop you from moving. He's got the ability to sort of talk in your mind. He's very intelligent, but also he's
cunning. Yeah.
Cunning, yeah. But very wicked, very cruel. Cruel, I think, is the best term for it.
At one point, they even say he can act as a direct mouthpiece for Morgoth. I believe it's in the Turin story, where he can speak with Morgoth's voice. He can almost be like the mouth of Morgoth in a way, where Morgoth can directly speak through Glaurung to characters.
Yeah,
and I'm like, that's unsettling.
I mean, that explains why he does what he does to Turin, because Morgoth has that ultimate pettiness going with Hurin, Turin's father, to just wreck his children's lives. And he's like, I've been given this golden opportunity. Thank you for building this bridge.
Right, yeah. And he gives Turin that pretty awful choice of whether to go and rescue this elf woman, Finduilas, that he's kind of close to, or to rescue his family, who he believes are in danger. And he's like, you can only save one. And then, of course, Glaurung is lying. He knows that Turin's family are not, in danger in Dorloman like he says they are. So he's not only like
Doriath by that point.
Right, yeah. And then, of course, they even go looking for Turin, and Glaurung finds them and is able to mesmerize them. And he robs Turin's sister of her memories and sets in motion that whole awful plot line.
Yes.
Yeah, which we'll get to in a few episodes. But yeah,
he brings in his Greek influences.
Yes, yeah. Tolkien does Oedipus. Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah. Where it's like, it's just, yeah, Glaurung, he's a piece of work, he's, and I don't know if he's literally slimy, but he just comes across as slimy,
he is. He's like acidically slimy. Like, when they talk about when he goes from Nagathron, when he finally wakes up after wasting Nagathron, and he decides to head to Bethel, like, there's like a waste around him. Like, the track is like a mile wide. Like, you can find where he walks, because he just destroys and decays everything in his path.
Everything around him, right. And and that's the point where he's large enough to basically be impenetrable. Because if you remember from a few episodes ago, we talked about where he comes out earlier than he's supposed to originally in like this one battle, and Fingon drives him back with archer. Archers are actually able to pierce his hide. It's not yet fully encrusted with scales yet or hardened, and he actually wasn't supposed to come out. So it's like he let the dragon out of the bag, like the elves were to know about the dragon at that point. And Morgoth was a little bit miffed about that. But yeah, by this point, Glaurung is not only huge, but is basically armored like a tank and impenetrable. And the only weak spot is, of course, his slimy, disgusting belly.
Yeah. Which, of course, is any good dragon, that's how he goes down.
Yeah, because Turin gets the idea where he's like, okay, to get to us, Turin and the people he's living with in the forest of Brethil, he's like, he's going to have to cross over this ravine, this chasm, and so if we hide down there while he comes over, we can stab upwards and kill him. And yes, that makes sense. But of course, it's also probably a suicide mission. So very few people want to go with them to actually do it. But no, Turin manages it. You know, I think by that point he was alone. It was just him. He deals the killing blow to Glaurung.
If I remember right, he's got one other guy with him.
Oh, does he?
I think that makes it. I think it starts out as a group of 5 or 6, and I think the only 2 that make it to the point where they actually take a stab at Glaurung is him and one other guy. I don't know if the other guy makes it past that either.
Right.
If I remember right, Turin almost doesn't make it.
Right.
Because of the filth that spills out of...
the ichor, as they call the ichor. Yeah, like, because he's using that meteorite sword, the black sword.
Yeah, the Mormagil.
A Mormagil. And he stabs to the hilt into Glaurung, too. So you've got, like, all of this black blood and ichor coming out. And that almost kills him. He falls, like, I think at one point completely unconscious. And but at that point, you know, Glaurung, he gets his final words in, though. He's able to lift his own spell off of Turin's sister that he's mesmerized, and give her memories back. And, you know, when Turin finds out about the whole sorry thing about how he's been married to his sister, you know, Glaurung dies, but, you know, Turin's sword has one last victim in the person of Turin. We get that creepy scene of the sword. I will slay thee gladly. It's like, yeah, no, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, Glaurung is pretty much cruel to the very end. Like, his last words are just cruelty. You know, he's gonna see these people's fates, you know, pursue, and that's very Norse, right? That these people's fates are like pursuing them to the bitter end. This is such a Norse inspired story because it doesn't have a happy end.
No, it's you know, it's funny because you read the Norse stories, and I mean, they're all over the place. Like, if you read the Eddas, they're sort of a you know, several hundred years after the fact attempt to crystallize these things into a form that makes some kind of sense. The reality is these stories are folk tales told in 1,000 different huts, you know, around the Norse world. And it is so very fatalistic because so many of their stories are. Yeah. Like, Ragnarok is not something like, and I love that when Odin goes and gives up his eye for the knowledge and hangs on the tree, what he gets is not a way to avoid Ragnarok. It's a way to do it the best way possible. But it's still going to happen. Like, there's no way out.
Mitigate the damage, but it's like, you know, it's still going to, you can't avoid it. Yeah, it's still going to happen. Turin doesn't even get that. He doesn't, you know, like, man, I suppose he does it the best way he can. He saves his town. But, you know, he does a heroic thing. I think that's why he's remembered as a hero.
Right. Well, and it really is like the slaying of Glaurung, because you got to, like, he gets, you know, Glaurung gets defeated in, is that the Glorious Battle, which is the 3rd battle. And then shows up again in the Neonathan Nordian, in the Dagor Bragaloth.
Yeah.
And, you know, wipes out Maedhros, which basically takes the whole Eastern Front from
by himself, pretty much.
From the children of Feanor, and is sort of just wandering around destroying things at will from that point on, and eventually takes down Nagathron. So he did one of the 3 hidden kingdoms, and you know, Turin, unfortunately, because Turin is such a tragic tale, he can't do the heroic thing, which is to stop the bad thing from happening, but he can do the heroic thing, which is to try and bring justice. And I think you could read it as revenge, but the reality of it is, like, he's not just cursed by Morgoth at that point through Hurin. He's also, him and his sister are cursed by Glaurung, because he's got that fog of mind on himself. He's got those years where he was just wandering around because Glaurung caught his eye. Right. And and implanted the false memories into him. And he manages to finally kill Glaurung, gets that lifted, and unfortunately has to bear the tragic consequences of that knowledge. But it's one of those things like, it's a very Batman style justice. Like, he wasn't the hero we may have wanted, but he was the hero we needed.
Right. Yeah. I'm Turin instead of I'm Batman. But, yeah.
Because I'm Turin.
Because I'm Turin. Yeah.
That's my contribution to this conversation, because I don't remember all the we haven't gotten there in our reread yet, and I didn't have a chance to go and really do a lot of Glaurung research. So
yeah, because I'm the McGill.
Yeah, exactly. Does it come in black? Like it does. Like
where's Baelig?
But speaking of things that are black, and Caligon the Black, and he'll be referenced later in the Lord of the Rings. Gandalf talks about him when he's talking about possibilities of destroying the One Ring, and he says that not even any. He basically says that Dragonfire was known to be able to consume the Rings of Power because some of the Dwarven rings have been destroyed by dragons. But he basically says there's no dragon who ever existed, not even Ancalagon the Black, who is the biggest and greatest of dragons, who could have harmed the One Ring at all. So that says something about the durability of the One Ring, and especially because the One Ring is created by Sauron himself. So Sauron was the greatest of Morgoth's servants in power. So anything he creates, like a quote unquote lesser being like Ancalagon, is not going to be able to harm it. But I'm like, that's pretty intense. And then we don't see him again until the Silmarillion, where, as you mentioned earlier, Jeff, he's in the final battle between the Valar and Morgoth, and is the greatest of the flying dragons.
I think he's the first of the flying dragons as well, if I'm not mistaken. I do remember a fair bit more about him than I do Glaurung, but just because his death is just it's so metal. Like we've always talked about
it's
how metal
very
Silmarillion is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But like we were saying, I mean, he was slain by Eärendil in a flying ship, who was empowered by the Valar, and I can't remember exactly if it says that. I think it just says Eärendil slew him. I don't know if it says like he rammed the ship into Ancalagon, or if he used a sword and pierced his heart, or something like that. Maybe there's more, or maybe there is something, and I'm just not remembering. But yeah, he's basically so big that when he's slain and thrown down, he destroys the peaks of Thangorodrim, the highest mountains ever, I believe. And so he's just that big that. And like we said, we kind of see dragons, I think, in the Rings of Power prologue, but it would be really cool to see this play out on screen if they ever like did a War of Wrath thing, whether it's a movie or a show or something, or even like an anime of that would be really cool.
Oh, an anime would be awesome. Yeah,
because then you don't have to do like as many like CG type effects. You can do it all in animation, which would be really cool. But yeah, he's basically like, he's the first of, I'm looking at some info online, he's the first of the winged fire drakes. And he was kind of the last defense of Angband when, the Valar were coming to knock on the door, and they sent out the final, final defense of Ancalagon, and, did not.
You just see Tulkas like looking at that and being like, I got nothing. Like he's in the air.
Right. Yeah, I can.
What do I see? Tulkas just trying to reach like he's trying to catch he's like, I can't
grab his leg.
Tulkas can't reach.
Just see Orome there. Come on, Tulkas, use articles. You're not dumb.
But he also knows they have Eärendil in his flying ship to combat the dragons, and also Thrandur and the eagles are battling in Calagon, because there's other dragon. There's like a whole force of dragons that are within Calagon that were sent out by Morgoth and Sauron to as kind of a final defense as well. But you had the eagles are coming, as our favorite Hobbit likes to say in Lord of the Rings.
Yep. And it's got a very War in Heaven feel to it, right? Because you have this giant black dragon show up, and he starts raining fire down on the gods, and they're being pushed back, and it's really Arundel and the eagles that come to the rescue. And so it's sort of this kind of metaphor, for Satan and Michael, with Michael being sorry, pronounce his name, Arundel, fighting off Caligan. I also I think the closest thing to an animated version of this fight probably would be Sleeping Beauty. If you guys remember.
Oh yes,
the fight when Maleficent finally turns into a dragon.
Yes,
I love that fight.
I've been thinking about covering that movie on Secrets of Movies and TV shows because it's such a beautiful movie. But yeah, and it's got one of the classic cinema dragons in it. That imprinted itself on my mind when I was a kid. And formed what you.
Oh, sorry. I was gonna say, like you said, Pat. It is very reminiscent of Michael versus Satan, and because you have his ship Vengalot is I believe the shape of a swan, and you have the birds, which are birds are a symbol of heaven in Christianity, especially you have the dove representing the Holy Spirit, and you have the eagles fighting these serpents, basically these serpent creatures, which in Genesis Satan is, or it's not Satan necessarily, but there is a serpent that's classified as kind of the enemy of mankind, essentially. So you have kind of the birds versus the lizard serpents, whatever you want to say. So it is a very, like you said, a very metaphorical type of thing with that. And
and the great red dragon of Revelation too in heaven.
Right.
Yep. Yeah, I think it's interesting when you look at Tolkien, like what you can see as the different things he was drawing from, right? Because Glaurung is so Norse, it's ridiculous. But Caligan is he appears to be very much an analog for Satan and sort of the last line of defense or last battle that Satan's going to try and pull off. Because Morgoth is supposed to be Satan,
right? Yeah,
more or less, right? And it's yet another one of these instances in the Silmarillion where it feels like kind of a waste. Just like Feanor gets one battle before he gets defeated, and Caligan only gets one battle, and it's kind of a tit for tat sort of a thing. But I'm still I wish there were more to Caligan's story. It's awesome that he's in the final fight and how he goes down, but boy, howdy, do I like dragons, and I wish there was more.
Another
coming
dragon
soon from the Peter Jackson. Coming soon from the Peter Jackson verse, the forbidden love of a dragon and an eagle.
Oh gosh, no! And there's our contractual obligation reference. Seemingly, it's not even that we're contractually obligated to reference The Hobbit. We have to reference that ship.
Terrible love story. Well, at least I'm cautiously optimistic that won't happen.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we're not getting to Smaug yet, but I did, we were going to talk about Smaug and his portrayal in the movie. So maybe
we would have referenced it anyway.
We'll get the double royalty this time because we're talking about the Hobbit and we're talking about the dwarf elf.
Just imagining that sound in Mario when you get coins,
yeah.
But
check off your bingo cards, everyone.
Yeah,
that's right.
Buy some material for Turin bar cookies. The recipe's coming, folks. We're almost there.
But another dragon who has very little said about him is Skatha the Worm, and I think the only two places I know that he appears in is one in the appendices of the Lord of the Rings. I believe it's Appendix A. It's the section about the history of Rohan and the Rohirrim. Yeah, and they talk about one of the early. They weren't Rohan yet, they were a people called the Eotheod, and they lived far in the north. And of course, like in the north of Middle Earth, you have the Grey Mountains, which are just infested with dragons. There used to be dwarves who lived there, but there was the war of the dwarves and dragons. Why that has not been adapted yet, I'm not quite sure. But apparently Skada fought in this war because he's a dragon who sits on a dwarf horde. And at one point, he comes into contact with a lord of these ancestors of the Rohirrim, the Eotheod, warrior named Fram, who then basically he just slays Skada and seizes the horde for himself. There's this story where the dwarves ask for the horde back, and Fram just sends them a necklace made out of the teeth of Skada and says, "Jewels such as these you will not match in your treasuries, for they are hard to come by." And let's just say the dwarves didn't take that too well, and apparently had Fram assassinated for this insult.
Dwarves and their grudges.
Yeah. The only other place that references Skada is actually the recent 3-volume poetry collection of Tolkien's poems, where we learn that Skada was a cold drake. Well, one, Skada was completely blind, and two, he was a cold drake. And that apparently didn't just mean that he couldn't breathe fire. It meant that he breathed ice. He was actually a blind, ice-breathing dragon. And apparently the poetry collection also mentions he was of the slithery kind of dragon and had this sort of slimy belly, and he left mucus wherever he went. It's disgusting. But like, so yeah, like...
Just slide over an area and then turn around and freeze it, and then like use it as an ice slide.
But yeah, that's basically all we know about Skada. But I've always liked that little reference to him in the appendices, because I thought, it gives some flavor to the history of the Rohirrim, and it actually does affect the story of the Lord of the Rings in a small way, because in at the end of Return of the King, when everybody's sort of going home and they pass through Rohan, Éomer and Éowyn gift Merry that silver horn that came from the Horde of Skada and was made by the dwarves.
Yeah.
So and Merry, of course, will use that horn to rally the hobbits in their battle against the ruffians in the Scouring of the Shire. So that's the great thing about Middle-earth. Something that happened like thousands of years ago, killing an ancestor of the Rohirrim, killing this dragon and seizing his horde, and treasures from this horde being passed down through the line of the kings of Rohan. This horn eventually makes its way to this hobbit who will help free the Shire from bondage. So it's like I love how it's it's all connected, right?
It's all connected. Yeah. Yep.
So yeah, and I guess that leads us finally to probably the most iconic dragon of the Legendarium, and that's Smaug the Golden, from The Hobbit.
So he's Smaug the Golden, but what color is he? Is he gold? I always thought he was red.
I always thought
I was depicted in art.
Yeah. I had the idea that he was red with kind of a golden sheen to him. Like his scales were primarily red, but had like a golden, almost looked like he was coated in like a thing of gold dust.
Well, he was laying in the horde of Erebor, so
that too.
So he was the gold kind of became encrusted into his scales, which of course is his eventual downfall, because of the one spot that wasn't, that didn't have the gold, the gold armor that kind of had been, just because he'd been sleeping for decades at that point. I don't remember exactly, but he'd been laying there for a long time.
So so here's where I complain about the Hobbit movies for trying to make something quote unquote more realistic. Okay, so Smaug tries to get around in the book. Smaug tries to get around the fact that he's got this huge weak spot in his belly by encrusting his belly with jewels and gold from the Horde, right? So when he's flying around, it should be that he has all of these like gold coins and like crystals and all this stuff like on his belly. But I guess the makers of the movie decided, well, that's not realistic. Let's just have it be that, you know, he has scales on his belly, but one of the scales fell off in this battle earlier. So he's got this one weak spot. I'm like, you missed the opportunity to have him have this cool, like, golden crystal belly. And you're just like.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, in the movie, because it has been a while since I've watched these. If I'm not mistaken, there's a part where because the dwarves restart the forge in Erebor and, you know, get a nice river of gold going, and they try to like trap Smaug within, you know, molten gold when it cools down, but Smaug breaks out of that, and as he's flying away, he kind of like shakes himself off, and you see like the gold kind of falling off of him. Yeah, and I think maybe that's where the armor is, like the gold armor part is coming from in the movie, is that he had like the molten gold on him, except for whatever, you know, reason there was that one spot that wasn't kind of covered, and I can't remember if when they're showing like the flashback, if we see him get like take a hit there or something.
Oh, we do. Yeah, that's in the flashback. Yeah.
Okay.
You know, the black arrow knocks the scale off in the flashback.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's like
I said, been a while, but you know, promise folks, I think we're going to cover that this year.
We'll get to it this year, yeah. But although I will say something positive about those movies. Benedict Cumberbatch does a great job as Smaug.
He does.
Yes.
Yeah.
He does.
I think Smaug. I mean, I think Smaug is one of the better parts of like most of the portrayal of Smaug. Of that whole thing is really well done in the movie. I don't know if it needed to be a whole separate movie.
The Desolation of Smaug.
Wait, was it Benedict or was it Leonard Nimoy?
No, it was Benedict Cumberbatch in the trilogy.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I think.
Why am I thinking
Leonard Nimoy had passed by that point? He was Sentinel Prime in the Transformers movies.
Oh yeah. I'm well aware.
He's singing a Hobbit song. But
it's true.
Bilbo Baggins.
Bilbo Baggins. Yeah, it was Benedict Cumberbatch. Yeah.
Okay.
Leonard Nimoy should have been in something else Middle Earth besides the silly song. That would have been great. But of course, the first time I ever saw something Smaug was in the animated Hobbit movie, which I think I mentioned at the top. I love how cat-like Smaug is in that. He's got this very feline face and these huge ears. It's just hilarious. And the actor who plays Smaug in that, like, has a tendency in the animated film, has a tendency to overact, so it's even funnier. But yeah, like as I mentioned earlier, like what I really like about Smaug is how much of a character he is. He has all this personality. He like exudes charisma, but you also know he's evil. You know, like he's not the kind of evil where you just like it creeps you out, like with Glaurung. You know, it's that kind of he almost exudes almost like the kind of like he's like the glamorous bad guy in a way, but you still know he's evil, and you still know he'll fry you with his fire if he gets a chance. But you can have a conversation with him. I love the trading riddles back and forth with Bilbo and Smaug. That's always one of my favorite parts of The Hobbit.
Yeah. And we should mention the reason that Gandalf sends them on this quest, or sends Bilbo along on this quest, is because they don't, he's recognizing that Sauron, there are signs of Sauron returning, and that he doesn't want Sauron to get Smaug as an ally to potentially, aid him in his, because if Sauron had a dragon, that he already had, tons of forces of orcs and Easterlings, and that, by the time of Lord of the Rings. But if he had a dragon too, because we, like you have the eagles who could maybe do something, but you don't have Arundel and his flying ship there to slay the dragon. I mean, I guess he could come down from space and maybe help out. But
if the Valar allow it, I guess.
Yeah, but that's the reason that Gandalf is so set on this quest to try to stop Smaug in the first place.
The last
like you said,
fire drake of the north, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. Smaug's like pretty much the last of the fire drakes, and was counted as the greatest dragon of the Third Age. And I like how they say that, like, when he first attacks Erebor, the Lonely Mountain, to seize the dwarf horde there, they say he's actually a young dragon and almost like runtish. He's like small, but somehow from I guess gobbling up a lot of people and sitting on that horde for so long, he like balloons in size to be like the greatest dragon of the Third Age. And of course, Gandalf will eventually reference Bilbo's helping in defeating the dragon later by having the great dragon firework thing appear at Bilbo's 111th birthday party, which is great both in the book and in the movie. I like how in the movie it's Merry and Pippin who set it off. It's supposed to be in the ground outside, or goes off.
Yeah, I like the memes that say, Gandalf is like, how am I going to celebrate my friend who's faced a dragon in his youth, or he's like, how am I going to celebrate his birthday? It's like, by terrifying an old man with one of the worst things he ever encountered.
Yeah, right. But I love how in the movie how he reacts to it. Like, Frodo's like, Uncle Bilbo, watch out for the dragon, and he's just like, dragon? Nonsense. There's been a dragon in these parts for 1,000 years, Like,
yeah, and he does. I don't think Bilbo even sees the firework in that one, but everybody else, like, it is a really cool one. But
yeah, I think Gandalf just wanted to scare all those, give those hobbits a good scare.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. But even but of course, in the course of The Hobbit, we have to deal not just with the physical antagonist of the dragon himself, but his sort of, because they say when a dragon is laid on a horde for a long time, he sort of, some of his evil will kind of seeps into it and can give you the dragon sickness, which we see in Thorin and in the movie portrayed very well. I thought Thorin's kind of descent into madness and be like, no, all the gold is mine. It's almost like the way the ring corrupts people, because with the ring, it's the evil will of Sauron corrupting you. So in this, it's the evil will of the dragon for its greed for its horde. And it seems to especially affect dwarves. And I wonder if it's the dragon sickness too that causes the feud for Skada's horde between Bram and the dwarves too. There's nobody's willing to part with anything.
Right.
Yeah. Well, it could be because it doesn't, at least in I'm forgetting from the book, but in the movie it's really Thorin who gets that dragon sickness. Everyone else seems relatively unaffected, and they're trying to talk Thorin out of some of his craziness. You have I forget which of the dwarves it is, but one of them says, you're less a king now than the day I first met you, or something like that. Because even though Thorin has reclaimed Erebor and has, his basically everything he's ever wanted, he still has to come to this and is just. It's interesting thinking of the dragons in Middle Earth. Like there definitely are. It's not an exact 1-to-1, but there some of them definitely are kind of reflect the 7 deadly sins. Like Smaug is greed, Glaurung is some of the others, and then Calagon is probably some too. So it's kind of an interesting, and of course we're assigning this, Tolkien may have, because he wasn't writing an analogy like Chronicles of Narnia or anything. He was incorporating elements but not writing it as Jesus is a lion type of thing. So
Yeah. Well, and you get a very Mephistopheles sort of feel from Smaug, right? Which is it's a portrayal of the devil as sort of this aristocratic, cruel and evil, but not in a brutish sort of way.
Right. He's refined.
He's refined. Whereas with Ancalagon, it's sort of like, I'm bursting forth from this mountain to lay waste to everything in front of me.
It's like I'm Godzilla, basically.
Right.
Like that's Ancalagon. Yeah.
And I think it's right. It's kind of, and it's two. I think it's two good sides of sort of what Satan represents. Is both a destructive force in the physical side of things and a destructive force, in the spiritual, mental side of things. Whereas, even after Smaug's gone, the lingering effects of the sin effectively can taint anybody who comes into contact with it, and sort of the sort of temporal effect of sin moving down the line into Thorin, which I don't know if Tolkien was going for that at all, but that is sort of the feeling you get with Smaug, because he is such a just a well-talked character. Because it's funny, you get a lot of words from Glaurung and you get a lot of words from Smaug, but you don't get any from Ancalagon.
Yeah, he's like,
unfortunately. Yeah. But I like Smaug because he also is that destructive force at the end of the day, right? He gets fed up and then goes on a rampage.
Yeah. I like the way he describes to himself what attacking a town is. Town baiting, he calls it, like bear baiting.
Yeah.
That for him, like, attacking a town full of warriors is a sport, but it doesn't end well for him.
Yeah.
He of course, the thrush brings news to Bard the Bowman of his weak spot, and I this always like makes me feel kind of queasy. It describes how the black arrow like goes into Smaug entirely, point, shaft, feather, everything goes inside of Smaug, and that kills him. He falls on Lake Town, destroys it, and this is a neat thing. They said like his bones were still there like decades and decades later, as well as all the gold and jewels and stuff. But apparently that area was like cursed, and nobody would go back to try and get the gold out of that spot. Probably
in some versions, it's a Bard has to shoot a I don't know what you call a scorpion giant metal javelin thing, and he happens
like
to be able to find he happens to be able to find the arrow from before, this giant thing from before, that he happens to find it still around somewhere and can shoot, because I don't think that's in the book. I think it's just it's just
an arrow. Yeah. But it's like a magic arrow, so it's fine. Like okay. But in the movie, I mean, they are black, but they're like ballista bolts.
Yeah.
And I think they say in the movie they were made by the dwarves or something.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, he has to like get to the top of the tower and
with his son. His son's there too in the movie. Yeah,
I think his son is helping him aim, and I mean he's pretty good aim if he can hit a dragon in the dark with this. when you're in a just you can't move locations
and you're probably suffering from smoke inhalation and all this other stuff.
Yeah.
And Jeff, you had that, you posted that great quote in the from The Hobbit, where it does not do to leave a live dragon out of your calculations if you live near him.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I mean that goes back to what I was saying earlier. That's why Gandalf thought we need to get rid of Smaug. And I don't know if what Gandalf's plan was, like once you get to Smaug, are you just trying to rally enough dwarves to go in there and take him out, while he's asleep or something? I don't exactly know what
I don't think Gandalf he never plans that far ahead.
Yeah. Well, that's effectively what he talks Thorin out of doing, right? Because that's what Thorin wants to do. He wants to go to the Blue Mountains and rally an army and go take the Lonely Mountain. get, burnt to a crisp and devoured by Smaug. Instead, Gandalf talks him into this crazy scheme with 13 people and a thief to try and go
burglar.
Yeah, roust the dragon out of there, I guess.
More like a grocer than a burglar,
You want us to take this 50-year-old fat guy with us? What are we doing here, Gandalf? It'll be fine. It'll be fine. Don't worry. It'll be fine. He's hardier than he looks. And of course, he ends up saving them so many times.
Multiple times, yeah.
Yeah.
And they say Gandalf, like, he just knew. He had this intuition, this foresight that the plan would only work if Bilbo was there. And it had to be him. It couldn't just be any hobbit. It had to be Bilbo.
Yeah.
So yeah, you have like, one of the most powerful dragons in the history of Middle Earth essentially defeated because there was this hobbit there. The hobbits are the people who everybody overlook. Because it was Bilbo who discovered the weak spot.
Yeah.
He discovered the weak spot. He tells the thrush tells Bard, and we all live happily ever after.
Everything works out in the end.
Isn't that basically what Bilbo says later? He's like, yeah, it all worked out.
Yeah, it all worked out.
And of course,
an ending for my book.
I thought of an ending for my book. Yeah.
Ever after.
And of course, Bilbo takes some of the hoard back with him. I believe 2 chests of stuff. Of course, the hobbits think he's got like an endless supply of gold and stuff. Would lead later to when Frodo inherits the place, after the party, having to evict those people who he found trying to dig a hole in the pantry.
I love that scene.
It was 2 boffins, a Bolger, and Sancho Proudfoot, that one guy.
Yep.
And Frodo has to wrestle him out of the house. I'm like, I always thought that was hilarious. Because the legend of Bilbo's go, that they didn't know where he got that gold from. They just know he went off, disappeared for a year, came back with chests of gold and stuff.
Yep. After being declared dead.
Yeah. You don't have to wait 7 years to declare a hobbit dead. You can just wait like less than a year, apparently, and declare him dead.
Yeah.
And then take all his stuff. But,
of course, then you find out in The Hobbit, like the whole time, just the shirt of Mithril was worth the entirety of the Shire. You're just like, what?
Yeah, it was worth the value of the whole Shire and everything in it. Yeah. And that came from the Dragon Hoard too. Yeah, the Mithril coat. But yeah, so anything else to say about the dragons of Middle Earth before we wrap things up?
No, the only thing I had on here, I don't think it technically counts as a dragon, but I referenced earlier in Rings of Power, we have that giant, sea worm creature.
Yeah.
But I mean, maybe it could be something because, Sauron kind of connects to it in a way. Like, it seems like he connects to it, and that's what, or it senses his evil or his presence or something, and that's what leads it to attack the ship that he's escaping on. So I could see them doing a dragon in the show in another season.
I definitely want to see them introduce dragons into the show. And I believe they took the idea of a sea dragon from some note that Tolkien made years later. So there definitely were sea dragons. So it's not like a complete invention of the show.
Yeah, but I think especially if the Balrog in Khazad-dûm is asleep, there's a good chance we could, and we have these other dwarven kingdoms that we have to deal with potentially, we were talking about some of the dwarven rings of power were consumed by dragonfire. So
right,
I think it's definitely a possibility. We see a dragon of some sort, in the show, and I think that would be really interesting to see, especially if they do like a Scatha type or a Glaurung, the worm type. That's
it would be different from like what you see in Game of Thrones or something.
Yeah.
Right. Well, even different than what we've seen with Smaug. So I think that would be really cool.
Yeah, and like I guess the only other thing I'd mention is that like we did not talk about the fell beasts of the Nazgul, because although they kind of look like dragons, and fly like some dragons, they are not. To me, those are more like wyverns. From kind of classical mythology. They don't have 4 legs and wings. They just have 2 wings and 2 scrawny little legs. They fly, they're dragon-ish, but I don't think the fell beasts are true dragons. Or else Tolkien would have just called them dragons.
Yeah. More like
more like bats.
Lizard pterodactyl bats.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's take all the unclean creatures from the Bible and make a one thing out of it. You get the fell beasts.
And I believe, Jeff, you had some feedback for us.
Yeah, I mean, really just one piece from our friend Tammy, but I think this is on our Baron and Luthien part 2 episode when we were talking about Dior and joking about how Dior was a
fragrance
brand, but the fragrance, and she posted the gift of when we first see Gil-galad in Rings of Power, and you see the meteor fly by, and he's like looking up at the at the stars, and she said, "Dior, smell like an elf." With that gift. So, only feedback we got this time, but
it was worth it.
Yeah, that's pretty great.
But yeah, that's it for this episode of The Secrets of Middle-earth. But before we go, we'd like to take a moment to thank our great patrons who make this show possible, including Lynn F., Suzanne S., Dennis S., Fonseca B., and Mary C. Their generous donations help us to continue to create The Secrets of Middle-earth and all of our shows here at StarQuest. You can join them at sqpn.com/give. And keep that great feedback coming, guys. We want to hear from our listeners. What do you think about the Dragons of Middle-earth? You can let us know on our Facebook page or on X. You can send an email to middleearth@sqpn.com. You can leave a comment on YouTube or visit our channel on the StarQuest Discord community. Oh, and Spotify has comments for podcasts now, I learned recently.
Yeah.
So you can leave comment. I've seen people leave comments there for our shows, so you can do that as well. So join us next time for another episode exploring the wonderful world of Middle-earth. Until then, Pat Mason, thank you for joining me and sharing the secrets of Middle-earth.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thanks for having me on.
And Jeff Haecker, thank you as well.
Thanks, Thomas.
And until next time, I'm Thomas Salerno. Thank you for listening to The Secrets of Middle-earth on StarQuest.
Here's another show on the StarQuest network you're sure to enjoy. The Secrets of Stargate. Find it wherever fine podcasts are found or at sqpn.com/Stargate.